The idea of raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour has sparked fierce debate in the United States. Advocates argue that it would lift millions of workers out of poverty, reduce inequality, and drive economic growth. Critics warn of potential job losses, rising costs for businesses, and unintended consequences like inflation. But what would actually happen if the U.S. implemented a $15 minimum wage nationwide? Let's break it down. First, let's establish the current landscape. As of 2024, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 per hour, a rate unchanged since 2009. Adjusted for inflation, the purchasing power of that wage has significantly eroded, leaving many workers struggling to meet basic living expenses. Meanwhile, several states and cities have already raised their minimum wages independently, with some, like California, New York, and Washington, D.C., reaching or surpassing the $15 mark. These localized increases provide useful data on the potential effects of a nationwide policy. How would a $15 minimum wage impact workers? Proponents argue that a $15 minimum wage would substantially improve the lives of low-wage workers. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that about 32 million Americans, roughly 21% of the workforce, would see a direct pay raise. For a full-time worker, the annual salary at $15 an hour would be $31,200, compared to $15,080 under the current federal minimum. Higher wages would help workers cover essential costs like housing, food, healthcare, and childcare, reducing their dependence on government assistance programs. In states that have already raised their minimum wage, such as Washington and Massachusetts, studies show that higher wages correlate with decreased poverty rates and improved health outcomes. However, critics caution that the benefits might not be evenly distributed. Workers in low-cost-of-living areas might experience greater financial gains, while those in high-cost cities might still struggle. Moreover, some part-time and gig workers might not see substantial changes if their hours are cut in response to wage increases. What about businesses? For businesses, a $15 minimum wage presents both opportunities and challenges. On the positive side, higher wages can lead to increased worker productivity, reduced turnover, and improved employee satisfaction. Companies may find that the cost of higher wages is offset by savings on hiring and training, as well as a boost in consumer spending driven by higher incomes. However, small businesses, especially those in rural or low-income areas, could face difficulties. Critics warn that some businesses may respond to higher labor costs by cutting jobs, reducing hours, or automating tasks. Restaurants, retail shops, and other industries that rely heavily on low-wage labor could feel the greatest strain. Evidence from cities like Seattle, which raised its minimum wage to $15, shows mixed results. While many businesses adapted without significant layoffs, others reported struggles to stay afloat. The outcomes often depend on the industry, location, and the speed at which the wage increase is implemented. The broader economic impact. A $15 minimum wage would ripple through the broader economy in several ways. For one, higher wages would likely boost consumer spending, as low-income workers tend to spend a greater proportion of their earnings. This increased demand could stimulate growth, especially in sectors like retail and hospitality. On the flip side, opponents warn of potential inflationary effects. If businesses pass higher labor costs onto consumers, prices for goods and services could rise. While modest inflation might be manageable, significant price hikes could erode the purchasing power of the wage increase. Economists are divided on the overall employment impact. Some studies suggest that modest increases in the minimum wage have little to no effect on employment levels, while others predict that a $15 federal wage could lead to job losses, particularly in industries with thin profit margins. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that raising the minimum wage to $15 could result in 1.4 million job losses, but also lift nearly 900,000 people out of poverty. Regional differences and challenges. One of the most contentious aspects of a $15 minimum wage is its uniform application across vastly different regions. In high-cost cities like San Francisco or New York, $15 an hour may barely cover basic living expenses. But in rural areas or states with lower costs of living, it represents a significant pay increase. Critics argue that a one-size-fits-all approach fails to account for these regional disparities. Some propose alternatives, such as tying the minimum wage to local cost of living indices or introducing regional minimums. Others suggest implementing the increase gradually to allow businesses and workers time to adjust. The political and social debate. Beyond the economic implications, the push for a $15 minimum wage is deeply tied to issues of inequality and social justice. Advocates view it as a critical step toward addressing income disparities and ensuring that full-time workers can support themselves and their families. They argue that no one working 40 hours a week should live in poverty, and that a fair minimum wage is essential for a functioning democracy. Opponents, however, often frame the debate as a question of economic freedom and market dynamics. They warn that government-mandated wages could stifle entrepreneurship and innovation, particularly for small business owners. The issue is also highly polarized along political lines. Democrats generally support the increase, citing its potential to reduce poverty and stimulate the economy. Republicans and some business groups oppose it, fearing job losses and economic disruptions. Lessons from state and local experiments. The experiences of states and cities that have already implemented higher minimum wages offer valuable insights. For example, studies from California, where the minimum wage is gradually increasing to $15 statewide, suggest that while some industries face challenges, overall employment growth remained steady. Similarly, in Seattle, research shows that higher wages have boosted earnings for low-income workers without major job losses, although some workers experienced reduced hours. These case studies highlight the importance of context and implementation. Gradual increases, targeted support for small businesses, and complementary policies, such as tax incentives or workforce training programs, can mitigate potential downsides and maximize the benefits of a higher minimum wage. Conclusion: a bold move with trade-offs. Raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour would be a transformative policy with far-reaching implications. For millions of low-wage workers, it could mean a path out of poverty and greater economic security. For businesses, it presents both challenges and opportunities, depending on their size, industry, and location. While the policy would likely stimulate consumer spending and reduce reliance on public assistance, it also carries risks, including potential job losses, regional disparities, and inflationary pressures. Ultimately, the success of a $15 minimum wage would depend on how it's implemented and supported by complementary policies. This debate isn't just about economics. It's a reflection of America's values and priorities. Should the country prioritize raising the floor for all workers, even if it comes with trade-offs? Or should the market determine wages, despite growing inequality? Whatever the decision, it will shape the future of work, business, and society in the United States.